Way better role. Way better. Like, love it. I'm like,
Ready?
okay. This is Haley. And this is Bailey. You're listening to Unleashed.
So, okay, Bailey. Apparently, according to the statistic from the Census Bureau, says that 83% of Gen Z and millennials anticipate tying the knot at some point in their life. So, getting married. That's pretty high. That's pretty good.
What was the percentage? I don't know why I didn't hear that.
83%.
No, that's super interesting. That is high. I feel like it's a big conversation right now that I don't know. I feel like that's higher than I probably would have guessed, I guess, is what I was trying to say.
It's really interesting. So the city that has the most couples living together but are not married. Holy Toledo. That's funny because it's Toledo, Ohio.
I feel like that's such a random place. I don't know if I would have guessed that either.
It says then Seattle. Yeah, I mean, Love is Blind was there, so that was a good one. That was a good season. And then Spokane, Portland, Minneapolis, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Madison, Reno, and St. Petersburg.
Hey, I was in St. Petersburg.
Petersburg.
St. Petersburg. I feel like I would have guessed LA for some of that, like for one of those, because I feel like I could see
Long Beach is on there, but not LA.
Okay. Interesting.
Probably because LA is so expensive to live in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Most couples that are probably living together aren't living in LA because everyone that lives in LA probably has 6 roommates because they need to split the costs.
Seriously.
It says 1 in 6 plan on never getting married or don't ever anticipate getting married. Wow.
That live together.
Yeah, I guess. And it says, 83% hope to get married someday, which is what we just talked about. That's pretty interesting. So, Bailey, question. Do you think there is a ideal age someone should get married?
I don't think there is an ideal age. I think it's very dependent on the person and where they are at. I think when you've had enough time to work on yourself, that you are in a good spot to be in a relationship and you are in the spot where you love yourself and you can go into a relationship and do it for the right reasons, I think that's the time. But I think there's so much pressure on age right now, especially, I don't know, maybe that's always been it, but I feel like that's something I've talked to so many people about recently is there's this age. I actually did a reel recently that was talking about your 20s, and somebody commented that they feel this like timeline to like 30. Like 30 is the age that like they feel like pressure. And I feel like I've even said that before. Like there's just this age of like 30 that feels like you have to have everything figured out. And I don't know why that is. That's just something I feel like I've heard recently, maybe because I'm in 25 and like in that age range, but no,
I guess your 20s are filled with like figuring out life and what you want and what you want to do, and then your 30s are more of like the years of settling down. Most of the people say you should have your ducks in a row or figuring out getting your ducks in a row. Now, I definitely am not in anywhere of those because I got married really young. I got married when I was 20. I was 20 years old, so I mean I was a little baby, but I mean I don't regret it, and I think that had I had the opportunity to redo it today, would I have waited longer? No.
I feel like we've talked about this though, and I think something you said actually, we might have talked about this on a podcast, I can't remember, but I think something you said was it's rare, like you felt like it really worked and it was the perfect time for you guys to get married, but it was young and you feel like you've changed a lot and you're always changing, so I don't think that's like a determining thing, but I think at that age, you're still figuring so much out that it can be a huge factor in getting married. It doesn't mean that it's the right or wrong decision. I just think it can be like, there's like a lot more you're figuring out at that age versus when you're a little older.
Well, and it's interesting is that a lot of people don't know, before I got married, I actually had an engagement previous to Bryce with a guy and that got called off. But I was talking to Bryce the other day, like, oh, could you imagine, like, what would your life be like if you had married him? And I was like, I probably would have gotten divorced. Like, it would not have gone well because the engagement didn't even last that long. I think it was maybe 2 months. So it really wasn't that long, but it was just a very bad relationship. I mean, he and my family did not get along. I mean, and that's a red flag in that. I think we've talked about that in the episodes of red flags in relationships, but it's interesting because I think about how I was so not ready to be married. I was trying to force something that just was not going to happen. And he actually was the one that called it off. I don't think I would have had the courage to have called it off, and I would have gone through with it had he not.
Which I feel like is a really hard thing to do once you're in that position. I think a lot of times, I mean, that's not a position I'm in, but I think, like you said, it would have been very hard for you to call it off because I feel like once you're in that, it's like you're comfortable, things are going, like that's a big life decision you already made. And to like step back from that, I think can really shake up your world. And I think a lot of people aren't able to really push themselves to do that. And I feel like it's just like that's a huge decision. Obviously, just like a huge decision is to say yes, but sometimes you end up in those situations that maybe weren't where your path was supposed to go. But you said like it's interesting because if he wouldn't have done it, like what would have happened? And that's so
Yeah.
interesting because you
Well,
probably knew it wasn't right too, but you didn't want to make
yeah.
that decision.
I don't think I didn't necessarily know if it was or wasn't right. Looking back, obviously, I think I had an inclination that it wasn't going to work out too. Like, if it was going to happen, it wasn't going to be a no marriage, I guess, is easy. But I mean,
Yeah, no.
it would have been a lot more challenging than most marriages would have started off as, just because there was a lot of things that were going on that I just did not want to even address. But I look back and I see all these things that made me realize he was not ready for marriage and I wasn't ready for marriage, just based off of like telltale signs. Like during our engagement photo shoot, when we were taking pictures, he refused to look at me and he was not excited or happy. And I mean, it was really hot. We were taking him in like this like really pretty aesthetic outdoor area in Las Vegas. And I was so excited and happy and we were having fun, but he was just not into it. And I was like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I'm just like, man, I just felt like I was like dragging him there. It was horrible. And
Yeah.
I'm like, usually
That's
during
not how you
that
want to feel.
engagement shoot, yeah, you want to be fun and it's cute and it's just one of those things. And I was like, okay, well, that was one of the signs too. But then on top of that, everything, like, he was just nitpicking everything that was wrong, whether if it was with me or the wedding or something. There was a problem with this, and he just wouldn't talk about the actual wedding with me. He would like avoid it all. And if there was discussion of it, he would he would have a problem. And I was like, oh my gosh, why is this so hard? Like, I feel like this shouldn't be this hard. And that was just kind of one of those things that maybe he wasn't ready for a wedding, I guess. And I was thinking the wedding was overwhelming, but I think that was just his feelings getting pushed into something else when he wasn't ready to be married. Because a lot of people put their focus on a wedding, I think, and they get excited, but then they don't realize after those, the cake has been eaten and what are they called? Vows have been said. You're now married, the party's over, and you have a marriage. And marriage is not easy, and people don't think about that.
That's something I actually I feel like me and you talk about a lot is it's not always the decisions in those big moments. It's not those decisions of, yeah, of course, it's a huge decision to get married and do these things. But it's, have you thought about like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what does life look like? Do you see yourself with that person? Like, if things get hard, do you guys know how to work through those things? Do you know how the person reacts when something is hard or, like something bad happens or whatever? I think those are really big things that I think can be overlooked when you get engaged. And like you said, a lot of people, when you're engaged, you put a lot of energy into planning a wedding, and that's really exciting. And, if you, it's just so interesting because that's something me and you have talked a lot about. And I think that's overlooked a lot just because of how exciting those big moments are.
I totally agree. And what's interesting to me as I'm coming up on me and my wisdom, let me just hold my monocle here. Like 7 years of marriage. Wow, so long, I know. But I think about how I would do things so differently with Bryce, and I tell this to a lot of people, is that you need to make sure that you understand what you're doing. Like, it's easier to call off a wedding than it is to call off a marriage. And once you're married, it's one thing to get divorced, but then when you have kids, that affects kids. And it's like, and you need to have these discussions of, do you want kids? What, religion, politics, all of those. I mean, financial obligations, beliefs, where you want to raise them. Like, these little questions, I don't often see people, at least in the culture I grew up in, people were not discussing them, and they would just say things like, "Oh, we'll figure it out when it comes." And that drives me bonkers when people say, "Oh, we'll figure it out when it happens." And I'm just like, yes, true to a point, like you can only plan so much, but you do need to have a basic understanding of these things. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for a very difficult marriage.
Totally. I feel like being able to sit down and have those conversations is so important and something that I am so big on. I love being able to have those conversations with the person I'm with because it's if you can't have those conversations, like I just feel like it's such a I don't know, to me that's such a big thing to be able to have those conversations. But I know a lot of couples don't have those conversations, but that's just how I am. Like Evan and I have talked about so many things in like the past and the future and all those things, and I think it's really important to be able to do both, to be able to talk about your past and talk about your future without it being this big deal, because I feel like a lot of times that's where those insecurities come from, that maybe the other person isn't ready for that next step or isn't confident enough to be in that relationship. And yeah, those conversations are not always easy, but that's not the point. The point isn't for them to be easy, for you to sit there and be like, this was the best conversation. It's for you guys to grow as a couple and learn each other and grow into the couple you want to be. Because I always say this, but you're two people coming and creating one life. You're going to be different, but are you going to see the same way and like make that life together is what I think
It
is
really
most
is.
important.
I've also heard that a lot of people who get married when they're older, like probably I mean I don't know the exact number, but I'd say it's like in their 30s and a little older, they have a harder time with the first like year or two of marriage. If someone's going to get divorced, on average it's usually within the first 5 years of marriage. Now, that's what they commonly see. That doesn't mean that just because 5 years has passed, you're at it, you're in the clear. Like, I know people who've been married 30 plus years and they get divorced. People who get married first, they have a really harder time when they're older getting married, is because they're used to a certain lifestyle, and so they like their dishes put away a certain way. It's like those really small things, like they have a routine. And often this is also seen with couples who may not live together full time, or whatever reason it may be. I mean, they could live together and still have this issue. I've definitely heard of the circumstances for both sides. But and then they get married, and then when they live together, and all these things, they bring in their stuff, and then all these things get moved around, and then they have a hard time with that, because the older we get, the more set in our ways we are. And I mean, even for me now, like, people are saying like, oh man, you and Bryce have been married so long, like when you guys have kids, that's gonna be so hard. And I'm like, why? They're like, because you have a system, a routine. I'm like, but I'd rather break that routine than jump into having a family when I'm not ready. And so it's just kind of one of those situations that, yeah, there's pros and cons to it both, but I definitely see the struggles of people having a hard time giving up what their life was like before they got married versus when they are married.
For sure. I think that's something we talked about recently was compromise. You said in a relationship, there's a lot of compromise. And I feel like not everybody is willing to do that. And I think it's finding the balance. It's like, you can't be just like giving up your ways or your life or this or that. It's combining them and like making one life, just like we were talking about. A lot of people have a hard time compromising, even though I don't feel like it is really compromising, because you're building something new. But I feel like it is, like people get so set that they're like, I can't change that. And it's like, when you step back, is that really that big a deal? Is that worth fighting over? Is that worth, like, I think sometimes
is that worth the energy?
Really, I think sometimes you can start to feel like you hear a lot of older couples be like, oh, they're nagging, or they're this or they're that. It's just like, I feel like I hear my parents be like, my parents are still together, but like always joke about that. Sometimes like those little things, when you start to pick up on those little things and they may not seem like a big deal, but you're always like saying something about them, those build into a bigger deal, because you're just stacking little things on top of each other, when really those little things, I feel like you can just sometimes step back and be like, okay, that's really not that big a deal. Like, we can talk about it, find a new balance, but maybe that's something I pick up. Like you said, dishes or something. Maybe somebody's not great at dishes, and you're like, okay, they do something else, and you kind of have to recognize maybe what else they're doing. Because I feel like sometimes it's not always going to be 50-50, and that's something we like always talk about. It's just that's not how a relationship is.
It is. So what do you think is something that is like if you had to pick 3 things to help someone figure out or be ready for being married, what would those 3 things be?
First one I'd say is being able to communicate and being able to talk about all those major things that we brought up.
We've talked about how like communication is huge, and often if there's not communication, there comes resentment. And that comes whether you said that resentment's not going to come now or in 10 years or 20 years. That's going to come way later down the road, whether like you've had kids, they've moved out, and then like things happen and you're like, oh, and that's when the resentment comes out. I've seen it in all sorts of situations. And that's because, things weren't communicated or they were brushed under the rug.
Totally. That's a huge thing I'm always talking about. Another one I was just thinking this was I put a quote on my story the other day, and I don't want to like actually quote it because I don't want to say it exactly.
But you're paraphrasing it.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing it. It was never give somebody. I'm just gonna find it because I'm gonna butcher this, and I think
it's like I want to give it. It's really good, but I can't say.
I know it's right here. Happiness is an inside job. Don't assign anyone else that much power over your life. That is something that's really big, and I think that ties for me into loving yourself when you're going into a relationship, because a lot of times people think they're going to find their happiness when they find their person and when they get married and when they have a baby, and it's always the next thing. But what about just being happy in the moment that you're in and growing into that? So I think that's
huge.
It's hard, really big thing. And I really liked that quote because I think it's super easy to be like, oh, I'm not happy because of this, but really that's an inside job, and that I know that's hard, and like it's not easy. It's actually harder to have to work on something on the inside, but I think that's huge. So those are two that are off like the top of my head. I'm gonna think about the third. Do you have anything off like just right now as we're talking?
A thought off of that. Perfect. You reminded me of the well, hold on, it was about your comment on number two. Sorry. Okay. No, you're good. It was you reminded me of like emotional vampires. There's a book that talks about people who literally suck the emotion out of you because you give them that power. And with a spouse and someone you care about so much, it's so easy. I'm not saying spouses are emotional vampires, so don't think that. But I'm saying that when you give so much love and effort into a person, and then they can have a bad day, and then they take that emotion out on you or whatever it is, and then it just sucks your happiness because you want to be happy for them or whatever. You share that emotion. It's like a box that you just like both feel together, I think. It's hard because then it's like they're taking all this emotion out of you. So it's good to have a foundation, like you said, of being happy, being grateful, not necessarily just where you are in life, but just with yourself, and having that ability to take a step back and realize they're allowed to have a bad day. And I also am allowed to have a good day on their bad day and still be empathetic towards that. And I think that's huge in a marriage because oftentimes, like, I would be so emotionally draining, I think, for Bryce, because I would have a bad day and then I would take it out on him. And then he would try to be patient with me, and then he'd like kind of snap at me or something. And then it would just kind of blow up. It's one of those things that it's just like, okay, hold on. We need to take a step back. Am I reacting out of this because it's something he did, or is it because I'm mad at something else that's going on? Anyway, that's a lot of self-reflection, but that was thought number 2. But anyways, that was a good one. I like that one.
Okay, I'm going to build on that a little more. You don't have to have it all figured out when you meet somebody, but I think the person in your life making you a better version of yourself is huge. That also ties into that, because I feel like I was just really getting to the spot when I met Evan of wanting to work on myself and realizing I didn't want to put that on anyone else, but I was not completely there, and I will always be working on myself. But who I am now versus then is a huge reflection also on Evan, because he always pushes me and always supports me, and there's so many other things to that, but I think it's really remembering that like, happiness is an inside job.
There's another quote, I can't remember it, but it was something along the lines of how it was the people you surround yourself with will reflect how you feel about yourself. Now, I don't know if that was a quote or if I just pulled that out of my head or if I was something I read, but anyways, but that it's true. Like, and we've talked about that several times, how if someone is making you feel insecure or telling you to dress a certain way or telling you to act a certain way or telling you to not do something because they feel insecure about it, so they're putting that on you, that's something that you should be careful with, because that's not going to change. You don't go into a marriage thinking, oh, I'm going to change them.
Oh, that's a good one. I think that's a good number 3.
That's number 3. That's number 3. Do not go into a marriage expecting to change a person, because it will not happen. Because it only can change if they are willing to change. And chances are that is not going to happen, and it's going to leave you feeling unfulfilled and them frustrated.
Definitely. And you can grow. I think you're going to change as people, but the big things that people think they're going to change somebody, those are usually where resentment can come from, where, like all these things that you hear later in life come from something that started when they were dating. And I think that's why dating is also such an important part, at least for me, of like Evan and I's relationship, is through these past 4 years, we have grown so much to understand each other in so many ways that when we go to that next step, we've grown so much. And I think it's important to date before you take these huge life, like you make these huge life decisions, because then you're running so fast, like it's the next thing, next thing, and you don't really have time. I feel like that's when later in life you're like, wait, I didn't really like this, or I don't really like that. But it's so hard to make those changes down the road versus at the beginning of a relationship when you're building that foundation.
It's true. And especially in the beginning, because you learn a lot, I think, in the first, like, even the first year of marriage. Like, I look back at that and I'm like, wow, that was like a huge pivotal moment. I also just remember sitting in bed with Bryce. Our apartment was so small and tiny. Like, we had our pantry was a linen closet, so we had towels next to our snacks. Like, our laundry room was a storage closet as well. So we had so much stuff. It was just like, it was tiny. And I just remember thinking, like, how are we ever going to be able to like get a bigger place? Like, how are we ever going to do this? And it was hard. And then over the time, we've had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears with both of us, and a lot of emotional challenges. And we slowly and surely built this life and little, family together with, our dog. But it's just one of those things you look at when you're looking at it in the moment. Yeah, it's hard. And, you're not going to grow overnight together, but it's going to take time. So don't, like you said, don't expect that you're not going to
you're not going to have it all figured out. Like,
No.
I think that's actually something I really like about Evan and I meeting when we were 21, is that we've been able to build a lot of our life together, and we're going to remember that first, like all these things we're building on. It's not like I came in like later, which is, everybody meets at different ages, but I've always said I really love that we didn't have it all figured out when we met. Like, we live in an RV. Like, there's so many things we're doing to build on it. Just like you guys said, you met young, you got married young, and you had a small apartment. But now look at the life you're building. And I think that's so interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you, and it's kind of the opposite of what we're talking about right now. So we talked about like 3 things to help you become ready for marriage. What is one thing that should stand out to someone to make them maybe think that they're not ready for marriage? Like, to take a stop, like a moment to like reflect and be like, okay, maybe I should work on that, or maybe this isn't right for me right now, or I don't know. Is there something that comes to your mind to make someone be like, maybe you should wait a little bit?
I feel like one of the things that I always say, but I don't think you would notice this, I feel like it's if you feel like you should get married, like you're at the right age and you're creeping up on this timeline and you just are feeling
like you feel like you should be married by now, or something like that?
You feel like you should be married, you should have had kids, you should, like all these should have, because some pressure that's put on you. I think it's really, really, really hard to notice when you're in it. I don't think that's an easy thing to notice.
No, it's
not.
But
I think if you can step back and really make sure that's not the reason you're making your life decisions because of some timeline, or, if you're with somebody and you're creeping up on this age you have in your head, everyone has a different age.
If you feel
like, maybe this isn't the right
this
person.
Yeah. If you feel that way, feel like you should be married right now. Like, Bailey and I will give you a hug. Like, we're hugging you right now. Like, it's okay. Like,
but I always say, like, would you rather step back and really make sure this is the right relationship than get married and in 5 years have to start over, and 10 years have to start over? Like, or right now step back and you never know, you can meet your person tomorrow or in a year or whatever. But I think a lot of times, I think that's a huge thing, that if you're able to notice that, it's so important. But it's really, really, really hard. And I'm not going to not say that for sure.
I have one, but it's not probably as relatable for some people, because since I grew up in a more Christian culture. So for a lot of my friends, I saw that, you're supposed to wait to have sex before you get married. Or did I say that right? You're supposed to be married and then have sex. You're not supposed to do it before. I don't know why that sounds. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys get what I'm saying. Yeah, you're supposed to wait to have sex until you're married. So, anyways, that's more of a traditional Christian belief. I mean, I think a lot of cultures believe that, and not just Christianity. Anyway, beside the point. Don't get married to have sex. That is my piece of advice. And as weird as that sounds, and this is totally not traditional, like what I'm about to say, if you're getting married to have sex, you just need to go have sex. That's horrible advice. Like, I know, but like, that is not a reason to get married. I see it happen all the time with my friends, and I'll tell you what, I actually know two people off the top of my head right now, and they are both now divorced, and they have told me that. And I'm like, I feel so bad for you because they were put into a situation where the marriage was unhealthy because they were in it for the wrong reasons.
But it's interesting because those people probably didn't have anyone to turn to talk to about it because
it's true
of how you're raised or, the
that
people
is
you're surrounded
definitely
by.
a thing.
And I think that can make you feel super isolated and honestly probably not even recognize that you're doing it for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be really confusing. And
yeah,
I mean,
no,
I don't know, but I feel like you might have a better,
yeah,
idea of that.
I was talking to my mom about it, and it's funny because I look back when I was like in high school and stuff like that. Like I just never really, I mean, I had the opportunity to have sex for sure, but it never was presented itself. And I did wait because I wanted to wait. And so when I was talking to my mom about it, because when I was engaged to the first guy, she was telling me, she was warning me, she's like, Haley, he just wants to have sex. Like, you need to be careful. And I was like in denial about it. I was like, no, he doesn't. And it ended up turning out like I'm pretty sure that was part of it. Like he just wanted to, do that. And and then we were talking and she was telling me, she's like, that is not a reason to get married. Like, if you're going to do that, just have sex because it's not worth ruining a marriage or a life over it because divorce is emotional, it's expensive, and it's hard. It's like so taxing on the body and you, and it's not a good thing. And she says they both have their pros and cons to it for sure. Like, marriage is great, but you got to make sure you're in it for the right reasons. And when I heard her say that, she's like, if you're just going to just go have sex, I was like, Mom, like, what? That is so, like, if I was in high school and she said that, I don't think she would have told me that, obviously, but it was just interesting to hear her say that because I was like, wow, you would have, I would have never assumed that you would have thought something like that before. And I really liked that because it did give me a chance to, think about, you look at all these people around in this culture you're in, and, it's very normal. People live together. I mean, I don't even think twice of it, but it's just like one of those things that when you're so in that kind of culture and society, and marriage is like you get married young and you just start families young, everything just kind of is thrown in your face. And I'm just like, whoa, I didn't realize that would be a thing or a reason to get married. I had no idea. Anyway, with all of these pointers and tips, our goal is just to get people to stop and think about it before, jumping into it. And if you're getting married right now, congratulations. Like, that is so exciting. If you're even talking about it, congratulations. Love is amazing. I love being married. Marriage is the best. And I mean, it's exciting. I mean, even the time, like, I think where you and Evan are right now is still an exciting time. It's like that anticipation and like all of it. It's just fun. And it's just, there's so many good things to it all, and that's what we just want to make sure that everybody has the best opportunities given to them possible, so that way they started off right and that they're just happy and have a successful future.
Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest thing is really just taking the time, and I think that's what we were pretty much talking about. A lot of it in different ways was taking the time to step back and make sure you are doing big decisions in life for the right reason, because I think it can be so easy to not recognize those things and get caught up in the moment and get comfortable. And, breaking off an engagement or breaking off even just dating, whatever it is a huge decision, but it's easier to do it before you make these big life decisions. And I think a lot of times it's hard to step back. That's something we love to talk about, is taking the time to grow as individuals and really focus on ourselves, because it gives you the opportunity to step back and be confident enough to make those decisions and make sure you're doing those big life decisions for the right reason. Because I agree, all those things are so exciting. I'm not like saying they aren't. I just think taking the time to make sure it's for the right reasons is so important.
I 100% agree.